I'm Dr. Fiona Lovely, and this is the Not Your Mother's Menopause podcast. I'm taking the taboos of menopause and perimenopause and bringing light to the dark. No bullshit, no shame. It's time for us to gain a new paradigm in female health, out with the old and in with the new, and I'm bringing fresh perspectives from someone in the arena. I've been practicing women's health for nearly 20 years, and I'm spilling the tea on what it means to live at midlife, knowing that the best is yet to come. I'm sharing my Gen X approach to living through this transition. Sassy, a bit sweary, and always honest. Tactical tips and instantly usable information is my aim. I hope to make you laugh and that you learn something new that helps you embrace the change. Together, we bring power to the peri. Onward to the podcast. Here's something that might surprise you. When our estrogen drops during menopause, we don't just lose protection for our bones and our brain. We lose estrogen's protective effects on our heart. Your heart is packed with mitochondria, the cellular powerhouse that keep it beating strong. But as we age and go through the stages of menopause, oxidative stress can damage these mitochondria, affecting our cardiovascular health in ways we're only just beginning to understand. That's where MitoQ's hero ingredient, mitochondrial, comes in. It's the world's first mitochondrial target antioxidant that gets directly into your mitochondria, targeting stress at the source. Studies show that 20 milligrams per day of mitochondrial in older adults can improve arterial function by up to 42% and support healthy blood flow, exactly what our hearts need as we navigate this life stage. Ready to support your heart where it needs it the most? Visit mitoq.com and use my special code LOVELY10 for 10% off your first order. That's mitoq.com, code LOVELY10. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. You're tuned in to the Not Your Mother's Menopause podcast. I'm Dr. Fiona Lovely, and today I've got an old friend of the show coming back to educate us on the things that we need to know about. Dr. Siobhan Mitchell, welcome back to the show.
Hi, it's great to be here again.
Thank you. I was just telling you, I pulled out the notes from when we talked last year. I was clearly look at this, double-sided. I was clearly so excited. There's the third one, actually. So excited for what you were telling me. I can feel the excitement in my note-taking.
That's great. Wow.
I can't wait to hear what we get up to today, to be honest. It's going to be just great fun, and I know you are full of the deliverables, so thank you. So you are the Chief Scientific Officer at MitoQ. You have a postdoctorate fellowship on brain aging, and you're an expert in nutritional neuroscience. Did I get that right?
Yes, that's exactly right.
I love it. Okay.
That's my passion. Yep.
Women's brain health, my God, and metabolic health was what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, which is so linked to brain health, right? So, because the brain is really controlling our metabolism, and we see that with GLP-1 agonists, they're so popular right now. That's really a brain-derived effect. So, yeah, totally important to understand the brain, to understand your metabolism.
Right, which, of course, prior to about 30 seconds ago, the women listening to this show went, wait a minute, I thought the only brain connection to weight was willpower.
I know. We're like that. I mean, actually, I don't want it to be that, because I find that such a trite kind of situation of like, oh, it's just willpower, when clearly it's so many other things that you can't control as well as just this amorphous term, willpower.
I guess that's the best that we had in the 80s. And for those of us caught up in the diet industry, which so many of us, for sure, my mother, that's how I was taught, etc. And I've seen it play out so many different ways in a woman's thoughts about her weight and her metabolic health. And of course, you and I know, having advanced biochemical training, that it's not just a number on a scale, it's representative of what's going on internally.
Yeah, and there's so many more things to consider than just the number on the scale.
Mm.
So that's the thing, is that you can be a certain weight, but if you have, for instance, fat distributed in your body in a certain way, that can be much more deleterious to your health. And I'm sure we'll get into it, but yeah,
Hmm.
that's just one example. Yep.
Hmm. Hmm. When I was reviewing the notes, again, like I said, you clearly blew my mind. So let's revisit that for a second. One of my
Okay.
favorite moments was the exclamation points I have after you saying that, oh gosh, there's two things that you said that estrogen decline means declining mitochondrial health.
Yes, exactly.
Remind me, please.
Yeah, so estrogen, people think of it as the reproductive hormone. So it's there to regulate our periods, which are there to regulate when we can get pregnant and kind of end story. But really, if you think about it, estrogen is doing so much more because, for instance, if you want to get pregnant, you have to control a lot about how your body is giving you nutrients, how it's distributing, yeah, various kinds of lipids and glucose around the body. So it makes sense that estrogen is controlling so much more. So it is controlling our glucose. It is controlling a lot of the way that we use our fat. It is controlling our brain in a huge way. So we've got lots of estrogen receptors in our brain. And then these receptors are also communicating with the mitochondria. And the mitochondria are the metabolic masters of our cells. So they're, just to remind people, the powerhouse of our cell. They make all our energy that cells can use to grow and do all sorts of things. And that energy is called ATP. But just to give that feeling of like, okay, powerhouse of the cell, got it. No, 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 no. There's so much more the mitochondria are doing. They're also really dictating whether cells live or die, whether cells are going to send out inflammation signals that then can cause inflammation to the rest of the body. So, for instance, estrogen, through the way it modifies mitochondria, can make less kind of inflammation all over the body for us. And for instance, loss of estrogen, which happens, of course, during perimenopause, will then cause more inflammation. So that's just one example. But we could go on and on about how estrogen controls mitochondria. The main thing that I think people should know is that estrogen controls how many mitochondria we have. So it's very good at helping make more mitochondria, so more energy capacity. And that's really good for our brains, obviously, which are very energy hungry. It's also good for our muscles. And so, once again, when you go through perimenopause, when you start losing that estrogen, you might actually start losing a little bit of your muscle capacity, that lean mass. And we can go into it more, but that's how important estrogen is, just to give that sense and how the mitochondria are really at the heart of that.
So it's a linear relationship between estrogen means mitochondria means more strength, better function, etc., with the areas of the body that rely heavily on mitochondria, which of course all cells, but you did tell us last time that there are three areas that have the most mitochondria in them in the body. So it feels like I'm testing you. I really am not. But can you can you talk about those, please?
Yeah, so obviously I just mentioned the brain, so that's one of those
Yep.
areas. The brain is using up to 20% of our body's energy, even though it's maybe about 3% of our weight. But then also the ovaries, and
Hmm.
especially those oocytes, the eggs in our ovaries, which have hundreds of thousands of mitochondria. So they're very energy intensive, and that requires a lot of work to keep those healthy. So once again, like a very vulnerable part of our bodies is our ovaries.
Hmm.
And once again, we all know that the ovaries start to fail in the middle of our lives, which is really the only organ that fails in that kind of dramatic way. So, yeah, there's a
Interesting.
lot of evidence showing that maybe the mitochondria function that starts to go down in the ovaries is what makes ovary dysfunction happen and then makes it so we lose all the eggs, all the egg quality that we need to sustain the ovaries. and also sustain our estrogen because our ovaries are obviously making most of our estrogen.
So then the scientists must be working on, the researchers must be working on prevention of ovarian senescence by seeing to mitochondrial health. Am I correct?
Totally, totally. This is such a hot new field. And I think I mentioned that study that's looking at rapamycin,
Yes,
which
yes,
is a
yes.
really great modulator of mitochondria. So it's an
Hmm.
mTOR inhibitor. This is
Hmm.
where it is very exciting. People who, or I should say, women who are receiving rapamycin, who are in that kind of, I would say, borderline of not being able to ovulate, not be able to produce eggs anymore. They get put on rapamycin and they start to have that ability to make eggs get released and
Hmm.
have periods again. So this is, I think, really exciting. That study is going on right now. So this is just preliminary data, but it is really exciting. So
What
that's the evidence that shows that mitochondria might be the thing to target for your ovaries.
And I think, if we talked about this a little bit last time, maybe we did, maybe we didn't, about the actual ovarian senescence. And I remember I was at the Longevity Fest, the A4M Longevity Fest, this was a couple of years ago. And I was talking to somebody who is involved in the clinical experience, shall we say, of preventing ovarian senescence. And there was a group of us standing around talking about this. And I said, hold on a second. I'm good. I do not need my period again. Like, I'm good. Like, it was a guy, right? So I was like, dude,
Mhm.
do you understand? Like, it's terribly inconvenient. I'm okay. I've had 40 years of it. We're good. But the other women standing there went, oh no, I'll take my period if it means that my body's healthier. So at the time, I didn't know that what we know now about how the the closing down of the ovaries affects so many systems in a woman's body, not just whether or not she bleeds.
Exactly. And I had the same feeling that you had too, up until my, yeah, early 30s, because, yeah, no one wants to have a period. That's not fun, especially with the PMS and the bloating and all that other stuff. But then when you realize estrogen is so protective for our health in so many ways, it helps regulate insulin. It helps regulate even how well our skin can hydrate and produce collagen, for
Mm.
instance. So
Hmm.
the moment you lose that estrogen, you are going to have skin quality go down, which I think women are always surprised when they hear that. They're like, really? That's what's causing a lot of that kind of skin degradation. And it's like, yeah, that's another thing that you should want to keep your ovaries going as long as possible so you look younger. Because that
Yeah.
that sometimes speaks to people that more than just saying your cardiovascular health
Yeah.
will really go off a cliff once you go through menopause. They're like, But then, once you say it's going to be visually there.
Yeah.
And then the other one that people are always surprised about is how I mentioned before, body fat is distributed. So once you lose estrogen, you are now going to have a change in body fat distribution. So you
Yep.
are going to start having, instead of it going on your hips and on your thighs, hitting your belly and up to 3 times more belly fat's going to get distributed on you during perimenopause and postmenopause. So almost all women notice suddenly like a little paunch there. It can be pretty substantial sometimes too. And that's not because you change anything about your diet or exercise. That's why I always tell people, because I think that's very surprising. I know a lot of women who are very serious about the way they exercise, they have a
Hmm.
good diet, and suddenly there's this belly fat. And I'm telling them that's because estrogen, once you lose it, is yeah, making it so that that loss is now turning us into kind of men, because men get belly fat, right? A lot
Hmm.
easier.
Hmm.
And this is where now, because of that loss of estrogen, it's much more likely that we're going to have fat get distributed into our bellies.
Hmm.
And this is now going to be dangerous fat for us. So not only not that attractive, but also dangerous for our heart health as well, too, because it's a lot more inflammatory.
This is the so-called visceral fat that you're talking
Mhm.
about, that we hear about
That's the
in the
technical term,
research.
visceral
Yes.
fat, which
Yeah.
people are always like looking at me like visceral fat. So yeah,
We're
so
good.
visceral fat's when it's inside our abdomen, so kind of right next to our organs, while subcutaneous fat is that fat that's kind of like right next to our skin. So you can kind of pinch subcutaneous fat, but you can't really pinch visceral fat. It's so stuck into your organs, kind of surrounding your liver, surrounding your gut. And that's the thing, is that people sometimes don't notice it after a while, and then suddenly like they super notice it. And then they're like, how do I get rid of this? Which can be
Mhm.
done, but just you have to target what has gone wrong, which is how estrogen is now being used in your body. So that's the secret.
Mm, interesting. So, is this the key then to why women come to me and say, my body doesn't respond the same way anymore? I still doing the same things I've always done in terms of eating. And I'm not saying that this is healthy, but I certainly remember for myself being in my 30s, if something didn't feel right or I felt a little bloated, I'd just skip a meal for a day or two and then I'd be fine. But that stuff
Mhm.
doesn't work. Like the rules have totally changed. Like, what is going on with women's metabolism at midlife?
Yeah, that is exactly what's going on. Is it's not so much broken, it's just a little bit challenged now with that loss of estrogen. Because that estrogen, for instance, made it so we could use glucose a lot more efficiently. And it made it so, for instance, our pancreas, which is making all our insulin, could make insulin more efficiently. And so, with that loss of estrogen, you're now going to have a lot more glucose kind of floating around. And that glucose can just literally be damaging in itself, right? So, for
Mm.
instance, glucose, when it starts to float around, can start to attack other parts of your cells. So this is called glycation. So then you get these things called advanced glycation end products that can attach onto your proteins. It's really bad for your skin. So if you start having a lot of these age compounds hit your skin, then it's literally like aging it much more quickly in terms of causing cell damage. So that's just an example of how, yeah, your metabolism starts to change. But
Mhm.
then, yeah, more than just that is your arterial health starts to change. So once people, women,
Mhm.
go through menopause, they have much higher risk of getting hypertension, because even the way that your arteries can dilate, in times of need, or just your overall arterial flexibility starts to go down when estrogen goes down. So, yeah, those are just all those things that, for instance, I noticed this especially when I hit my early 40s, is I always had great blood pressure. It was, I didn't have to try. I could eat all the salt I wanted. And then suddenly it was really bad. It was kind of borderline hypertension. And I just thought, like, what am I doing differently? And it's just, yeah, because estrogen wasn't there anymore. So that's, I think, really what was a big signal to me early on. So that's,
Mhm.
I think, the other thing I want women to be aware of, is that even when they're in that stage of, it doesn't feel like menopause is that close, so late 30s, early 40s, it's still a time when you have a lot of fluctuation of estrogen. And that fluctuation of estrogen can cause a lot of turmoil, even to your appetite. So estrogen is actually really good for kind of keeping your appetite under control.
I did
And
not
then when
know that.
you lose that estrogen, or you even go through like a period where estrogen dips
Yep.
suddenly, unexpectedly, and you're ravenous. And I definitely had that a lot more in my early 40s. It's suddenly I was just ravenous for food. Like breakfast was not enough, lunch was not enough. I was just hungry all the time. And that was estrogen.
So we can probably see that reflected in the menstrual cycle too when a woman
Mhm.
is low estrogen when she's in her PMS. Like the
Yeah.
longer I do this and talk about hormones, the more I start to understand the things that we have been labeled as pathologies like the PMS. Well, PMS is essentially low progesterone, but it's also low estrogen during that time. We have no filter anymore. And apparently, according to you, I've just learned that with low estrogen during that time, we're going to want to eat everything in sight. Fascinating.
Yeah, exactly. And we're going to want to eat fatty food, for instance. So we're not having as much estrogen around, so we're not as good at using glucose. So suddenly you start craving fatty stuff, which, is also not great for your body.
No, no, my husband has this thing. Well, this was years ago now because I no longer have a regular period, but if he saw that there was if he's like, where do you want to go for dinner? And I would say something like, let's go to Five Guys, and he'd be like, whoa, it must be that week. Five Guys, which is for those of you that are not in North America, I don't know if Five Guys is around the world, but it's like hamburgers and fries, like really
That's
del
all. Yeah, just
delightful.
hamburgers
That's
and
it.
fries.
Yes, hamburgers and
Hmm.
fries. That's it. Salty, greasy, crunchy, fatty.
Totally.
Yes, all of
Yeah.
those things. And then he'd give me the side eye, go, "Oh, it's that week, is it?" I'm like, listen, you best be farther away than an arm's length when you say stuff like that. Especially during that week. Anyways, I want to come back to something you said about glucose and estrogen. So we talk about the hypometabolism that happens in a woman's brain at perimenopause that has to do with how estrogen and the receptor and glucose is the primary fuel, and then estrogen dips, and now the fuel has to essentially restructure itself for a new fuel source. You're
Yeah.
saying that that is happening not just in the brain, but in the rest of the body too.
Yeah, all over the body. So it's, I think one of those things that is happening, yeah, as you say, like as part of our menstrual cycle, just a little bit, a
Mhm.
little bit of that kind of is happening where you're better at using glucose, earlier on in your cycle, and then it starts to not be as good. But then literally this is getting worse and worse and worse as you go through perimenopause. And so it can drive a lot of issues. So it can drive a lot more fat deposition. So
Hmm.
people do start to gain more body fat.
Hmm.
And this is even more interesting. So women obviously have more body fat than men, but that body fat is not as dangerous as men's body fat. Like it's not causing as much inflammation. It's not, kind of being, I would say, sort of a risk factor for diseases. But as soon as you lose estrogen, that body fat becomes more of a problem, becomes more of a risk factor. So, yeah, everything that protects us as women against all these things like heart disease and diabetes when we're young, it just goes away. Even our mitochondria. So, like our mitochondria, because of estrogen, are less likely to have a lot of oxidative stress than men. So, men's mitochondria make oxidative stress a lot more. And then that goes away when we lose our estrogen. So then we're now going to have more oxidative stress, especially in our fat, which is then very inflammatory, but then other
Yes.
places as well, too, like our muscles.
For the women listening to us having a very nerdy sciencey conversation, which is like,
We're really nerdy, yeah.
I know it's like catnip for me. Never mind.
Mhm.
What does that mean? Oxidative stress. Can you talk about
Oh,
that?
yeah, oxidative stress. So, oxidative stress basically is this, I would say, pollution that your mitochondria can cause while it's making energy. So, when the mitochondria is making ATP, this kind of energy currency of our cells, it's basically using these electrons, this electron transport chain, to help make that ATP. Those electrons are very reactive. They're kind of just almost like you would think like how battery acid is reactive. This is kind of like the same thing. It kind of is just this problem of like once you have free electrons, they can start to just damage things. So that is basically when these electrons kind of start to join up with some other molecules called reactive oxygen species and cause damage to the rest of our cells. So these reactive oxygen species can cause damage to our DNA, so literally mutate our DNA. It can mess up our proteins so they won't work as well. It can mess up our membranes, so the membranes that surround our cells and our mitochondria, so they're not having as much integrity, and that can then lead to a cell or a mitochondria to just literally fall apart. So reactive oxygen species is really bad for us, and reactive oxygen species is that sort of way that we talk about oxidative stress. So oxidative stress is just how much of those reactive oxygen species you might have somewhere.
Mhm. Mhm.
And your mitochondria has developed all sorts of ways to kind of control that oxidative stress, just as, the matter of fact that mitochondria is making most of it. So up to 90% of the oxidative stress in your body is coming from your mitochondria. But as you get older, the mitochondria is less able to deal with that oxidative stress. So it gets worse and worse. And this is literally contributing to aging. And so, yeah, estrogen, which can then keep that oxidative stress also under control, once that goes away during aging, now your mitochondria are that much more vulnerable and your cells are that much more vulnerable. So, yeah.
And there's things we can do for this. Like what when we see a woman's estrogen start to decline, we can assume then that her mitochondrial health is declining as well, and
Yes.
all of the stuff that comes along with that. So, what can we do to support our systems when this is happening?
Yeah, well, the big one right now, of course, is hormonal replacement therapy, HRT,
Hmm.
right? So that's, I think, big news right now because there used to be a black box warning on HRT, kind of saying like, oh, if you have blood clots, if you've had cancer, especially hormonal related cancer, like don't touch this. We don't know how good it's going to be. Now I think there's this understanding that this big study, the Women's Health Initiative, that tried to kind of, I would say, summarize some data from like over 20 years ago, saying that HRT was bad for women,
Hmm.
has now been, I would say, reinterpreted, and now they understand that actually HRT is very good for women. It's not really causing any huge risk if you don't have, for instance, lots of history of blood clotting and a history of like I've actually had a hormone related cancer. So yeah, there's this fear of HRT for a long time. Like I tried to get HRT from my physician. This
Hmm.
was about 5 years ago, and he was like, "No, not a good idea." But I'm sure
Do you
you've
know
heard
who I
that.
am?
Yeah. And I had to really fight him on that. Actually, I didn't win with him. I had to go somewhere else. But the good news is now that black box warning has been taken away. So physicians feel a lot more comfortable prescribing it for women. So yeah, replacing our estrogen, replacing our hormones so that we're still getting all the benefits of
Hmm.
those hormones for our metabolism. And especially for we haven't even talked about menopausal symptoms like the hot flashes, the brain fog, that kind of thing that HRT is really great for. But I will say there's still a lot of feeling about HRT that women are uncertain about it, like they're just not sure. And so there are other options. One of the other options that I think it's important for women to know about is phytoestrogens. And so phytoestrogens, they're everywhere, I would say, in our food, but there are some foods that actually have a lot of phytoestrogens. And just to be clear what a phytoestrogen is, it's basically a plant-based molecule that looks somewhat like estrogen. And so it can act somewhat like estrogen, so signal and kind of activate the same receptors as estrogen, but usually not nearly as powerfully. So they're kind of like a little boost of estrogen signaling, but not like kind of like the full bang of actual estrogen.
Hmm.
And so phytoestrogens have been used for like literally thousands of years to treat things like menopause symptoms. And there's a lot of evidence that women who eat a lot of phytoestrogens, especially from soy is one of the major ways you can get phytoestrogens, they seem to have less menopausal symptoms. And kind of similarly to what we were talking about before, if you have a high diet of phytoestrogens, you seem to have overall better cardiovascular health, overall better metabolism, even better bone health. So, yeah, these phytoestrogens can be very powerful in the way that they kind of do a little bit of activation of the estrogen receptors and do a little bit of the work of the estrogen that you no longer have. So that's, I think, also very effective is looking into phytoestrogens.
Okay. And you mentioned soy. Are there other places we could get them?
Yeah. There's all sorts of places. So you can get them from, for instance, things like flax. So these
Hmm.
are lignans, and those, from flax seeds, for instance, have a lot of estrogen. And then red clover, black cohosh. These are usually things that people don't eat, though. So these are usually more available as supplements. When I think about the way that people could get it from their diet, the main way they can really get a decent amount of phytoestrogens is through soy. And in particular, they'll get isoflavones, which are these
Okay.
range of phytoestrogens from soy. So yeah.
Okay, and I'm just looking at my notes for today, and I want to talk about, well, we're talking about soy and estrogen receptors. We've got ER beta receptors, which are in the heart, brain, and bones. We've got ER alpha receptors, which are in the breasts, the ovaries, and the fat cells. But obesity is linked to activity on these different estrogen receptors, yes?
Yes, yeah,
Please
exactly.
share.
Yeah, so we have a lot of estrogen receptors on our adipose tissues, on our fat cells. So we have estrogen alpha receptors and estrogen beta receptors. And I would say the good news about phytoestrogens is they mostly are working on our estrogen beta receptors, which are kind of more linked to changing our metabolism for the better, right?
Mm.
So, estrogen beta receptors, for instance, are responsible for, as I mentioned, that better use of glucose. So that's one benefit. The other thing that is good for people to remember is that the estrogen alpha receptors are kind of more linked to reproductive things. So
Okay.
that's where when people kind of get scared of like, oh, I don't want to get cancer and I'm kind of worried about, activating my estrogen. Well, this is not going to link up, the phytoestrogens. They're not going to do a lot of activation of your alpha
Mm,
receptors. So
okay.
you're not going to have a lot of activation of your ovaries or activation of your breast, that kind of thing. You will get more activation on sort of metabolic places that you care about, like your bone and your muscle.
Okay. Well, for a long time, soy was kind of also verboten. It was one of those things
I
that
know.
was talked about the fact that it was genetically modified and that even the organic stuff wasn't all that great. So what's changed? Have we come to a place where we can actually use these safely?
Yeah, this is, I think, where a lot of that fear came from that feeling of like, oh, I'm afraid of estrogen because of that
Mm,
Women's Health Initiative study and HRT in general. And then it just got linked up to soy as a sort of source of that same kind of estrogen activity.
mm,
So that has been completely, I would say, debunked as well, too. So when they look at, for instance, women who have a high intake of soy, they're
mhm.
actually having decreased risk of cancer. So that's kind of like when you look at overall all the studies that have been done on soy, it looks like soy intake is protective. So yeah, it's once again, people get scared of this idea of like feminization. So for instance, I know a lot of guys are like, I don't want to have soy, it's going to feminize me. And once again, as I just pointed out,
Mhm.
most of the phytoestrogens are going to be hitting your beta receptors that won't be doing anything to your breasts, or anything like that. It's
Mhm.
just helping your metabolism. So men can actually benefit a lot from phytoestrogens as well, too.
Oh, that's so interesting. That flies in the face of a lot of sort of mythology as we've just talked about what is safe for men to take and women for sure. It's that whole phobia about estrogen is so crazy to look back on it now, knowing what we know now and we see how
I
we've
know.
it's nuts.
I just feel like it's such a bummer. Like a generation of women missed out on
Yes,
this kind
they
of
did.
youth giving thing. So I think that's just so unfortunate that they spent those years without estrogen kind of getting kind of replaced or even getting more phytoestrogens to sort of help themselves along during perimenopause.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the thing that's really important to know about perimenopause is it seems like there's these windows to really help keep your metabolic health on track, right? So that when you're done with perimenopause and you're kind of postmenopause, that you are an overall healthier person. And last time we talked about brain health, right? So that
Hmm.
you really want to control those vasomotor symptoms like night sweats and hot flashes to preserve your brain's white matter.
Hmm.
So you have to do that during perimenopause. You have to control those vasomotor symptoms for overall long-term health. And the same thing is happening for metabolic health as well, too. You really want to control how much, visceral fat that you're putting onto yourself during that perimenopause transition. You really want to kind of keep it under control. So then when you get to the other side of menopause, you're overall extremely healthy. So that's the idea.
I love that we have those options now. As science marches forward, we can figure all these things out. And, lots of times I'll have women ask me, well, why was this never a problem for my grandmother? Why weren't women talking about this before? And I said, well, first of all, your grandma probably had HRT, your mother not so much. That would have been the generation for women in my age group. But also, as women weren't talking about it. And we certainly weren't associating the things that we were experiencing in our late 30s and early 40s and even mid to late 40s as menopause. And nobody wanted to admit that they were in menopause because it was a sign of,
I know.
you just time
Yeah,
to
like
chuck you out to,
you're washed up.
yes, go out to pasture. You're gone. See
I
you later.
know.
It just, all of it's just so bananas to me when I think about it now. But okay, so let's come back to this. You have said for supporting the estrogen and supporting metabolism for us at midlife, HRT and phytoestrogens. What else have we got?
Yeah, so the other thing is to support your estrobolome. And probably people are like, what is an estrobolome?
Yes, please.
So
Fill us in,
I
please.
know, I know. An estrobolome is basically these bacteria in your microbiome. So, as everyone knows, we have a microbiome and it's filled with billions of different kinds of, or actually, I should say trillions of different kinds of bacteria, all kind of doing actually lots of beneficial things for us. So, breaking down a lot of nutrients so we can use them better. Some things are not as beneficial, but overall, we need our microbiomes. And in fact, our microbiomes are very useful for helping regulate our estrogen. And so when I call an estrobolome like a sort of, definition, it is basically defining those bacteria that are helping regulate how you're using estrogen. And the idea is that you want to support your estrobolome so it can do the best job it can. And this is how you can do it. So one way you can make your estrobolome be more effective as you go through perimenopause is you can look for probiotics. So, for instance, Bifidobacterium brev and Bifidobacterium longum that can have this activity called beta glucuronidase activity. And what that does basically is it cleaves off this special molecule called glucuronidide off of your um, estrogen that is basically kind of getting excreted as a waste material. So when estrogen starts circulating through your body, it can go to your liver and your liver can mark it with these kind of, yeah, I would say excretion markers. So glucuronidase is one of those, and it just basically is telling the body, get rid of this. It's like we no longer need this. And so once it gets marked with that, then it will basically get transferred into your intestine. And then this is where if you have the right microbiome, that microbiome can actually recognize this estrogen and actually recognize that it has this, glucuronidase kind of factor on it. And believe it or not, like these bacteria actually want to use that as fuel. So they break it off. And now that estrogen is kind of like a free estrogen, it's in sort of active form estrogen. And now that can get reabsorbed into your body and get used again. So now you've kind of recycled your estrogen through this. So that's
Fascinating.
really useful. And I think women barely know about this. So one of the things that women do notice, of course, is when they go through perimenopause that their gut is starting to have issues, right? So there's more bloating, there's more just upset stomach, that kind of thing. And so this is also another sign that as you're losing estrogen, you are having more inflammation in the gut, your barrier, your intestinal barrier, your gut barrier is no longer working as well. And that means you're going to be losing a lot of these beneficial probiotics that have this estrogen recycling activity. So yeah, now you're kind of like in this cycle of losing more estrogen than ever before because your gut microbiome is not situated to sort of help you. So you kind of want to try to youthify your microbiome by making it look like a younger woman's by adding these kinds of probiotics that have this activity. The other
Wow.
way the estrobolome can be useful to women is through the phytoestrogens I just talked about. So a lot of these phytoestrogens, especially those isoflavones from soy, aren't super active in the form that you eat them in. So the main forms that you get from when you eat some soy are genistein and daidzein, and they also have these kind of sugars attached to them. And so if you have the right gut microbiome, you can cleave off the sugars off of daidzein and make it more useful and also make it get more likely to get metabolized into this very powerful phytoestrogen called S-equol. And this is, I think, the most useful phytoestrogen of all of them. So, and you
Say
have to have
more.
the right microbiome to do that. Yeah.
Okay, well, like, okay, where do we get it? How do we get it? Like, is it just a matter of making sure we've got the right probiotics, the right supporting the microbiome?
Yeah, well, this is a whole huge research field, believe it or not. Even though probably people have never heard of S-equol, it's huge in Asia, especially Japan. There have been decades and decades of research on S-equol because it's been shown to be so beneficial for women. So, a
And
woman who's Mhm.
this is why women in Japan, we've looked at the research, we wondered why women in the Japanese women were not having the menopause. I'm so sorry, I just interrupted you, but I
No,
got
yeah, yeah.
excited there for a second. I connected a
Yeah.
dot. Um, it's going to be reflected in my notes. Anyways, this is why Japanese women have less menopause symptoms. They suspect, scientists suspect it's because of the amount of soy that gets consumed. Is this what we're talking about here?
Yeah, it's the amount of soy, and it's also that a lot of Japanese women, so about, I would say 50 to 60%, have the right kind of microbiome to make this S-equol. And when they make this S-equol, study after study shows that they have overall like better metabolism. So they have, better glucose control. They have, more healthy arteries. They have like less risk of death. So I think
Hmm.
that's really fascinating. They have
Yeah.
less risk of cognitive decline. So if you make S-equol, like it is literally just this huge protective factor because it's doing so much of the job of estrogen for these women. So this S-equol is a lot more bioavailable than a lot of other phytoestrogens. It can get into our brains, and so it can have all these benefits that clearly are shown these Japanese women. So for decades and decades, scientists have been saying like, how can we get more women, or actually even more people, because S-equol is also beneficial for men, to
Okay.
have that ability to make S-equol. So they've been trying. They've been like, all right, what if we give women more fiber? What if we give them more soy milk? Will they get that capacity to make more S-equol? And it's been very tricky. There's like a few hints. So for sure, if you are eating more soy, you'll have more likelihood of making S-equol. And then if you have these microbiome kind of, I would say, probiotic areas like the bifidobacterium, lactococcus, that kind of thing, you will be more likely to make S-equol, but they haven't quite figured out what it is. So it's still a bit of a mystery. But so then what's happened is, rather than trying to make women turn into like these S-equol making machines, there's now this push in Japan, especially, just to make S-equol is a supplement. So women can have the ability to just go out and buy it and have these benefits. So that's the other thing that has been going on the last, yeah, few decades or so, is a lot of studies coming out showing S-equol can help a lot with menopause symptoms, but also those menopause situations that are really deleterious to our health. The fact that we're losing bone more quickly as we go through perimenopause, S-equol has been shown to help keep your bone kind of more intact. It's also helpful to keep your arteries more flexible. It's also more helpful to keep your visceral fat at bay. So that I think was really interesting too. So
Mhm.
just S-equol alone can make it so that you will have less visceral fat and you'll overall have a better metabolism. So
Oh.
yeah, so that's, I think, what's really interesting. This is like one of these really exciting molecules that I wish people knew more about because it has so many benefits. And yeah, that there's been this fear about soy, so it's hard enough to get people to take soy,
Hmm.
but then to then say, all right, there's this metabolite of soy that, yeah, even if you have the soy, like you are probably not going to make this. Only maybe 20% of women in the West, so American women, can make S-equol. So it's sort of like, even if you have soy in your diet like every day, you might not be getting the benefits from it as much. So that's why, getting this S-equol another way is probably also a really good idea, just to support all those things that start to go wrong when you go into menopause.
Oh my goodness. I love science. It's so awesome. So is it just a matter of we should all be supplementing with S-equol, even the guys, but we're talking about women on the show. So where do we get it? What's the best way to take it?
Yeah, so one of the things my company did in the last year is really look at how to support women better in this change in your metabolism during midlife, because we see that women are rushing off and going for these GLP-1 agonists as like a quick fix for like the fact that they're getting a little bit of belly fat or the fact that their appetite is out of control. And that's a big fix and it can work. But we also think like women might want to be more open to something that's like a little bit more, I would say, not the big hammer, but kind of like the subtle sort of nudge. And also the thing that's going to address what's really changed about your body, which is your hormones. So that's the thing about a lot of things women try to do in midlife, where they go on crazy diets or they get the GLP-1 agonists. So we were like, okay, let's find some things that can really help women. So we've now made this product, and it's called like hormonal metabolic control, which is kind of a mouthful, but it does contain S-equol, and it also contains B-brev. So one of the probiotics I talked to you about that helps your estrobolome work better. So we feel like these kinds of materials, so the S-equol and the B-brev together, can really kind of bring that estrogen activity back that you used to have during premenopause. Not to the same extent, because it's not a replacement, it's not an HRT, but just kind of like nudge it in the right direction. Because I think that's what women actually might want at this point, is maybe not so much like, all right, I still have some estrogen, it's still working a little bit. I don't know if I want to completely try to like replace it or put a whole bunch of estrogen on top of it. But if you could just nudge it in the right direction, so those things that I noticed that have changed can be helped, that is, I think, really what makes the difference.
Mm.
So yeah.
Well, I think we can take there's so many threads there that I want to pull from, but I think most of us will take whatever help we can get at this point, especially if the science is on our side. There's so many things that we can do, and not everybody wants to be on HRT. Not everybody wants to be on the pen, as you said. It's a medication that is the big hammer, and it's expensive, so it can be inaccessible for a lot of people to be on the GLP-1 medications.
Let's talk about sleep for a moment. Because if you're navigating perimenopause or menopause, you know that a truly restful night can feel like it belongs to another lifetime. The night sweats, the restless hours, the 3 a.m. wake ups that leave you exhausted by the time you're supposed to get out of bed. This is exactly why I want to tell you about Cozy Earth. Their bamboo sheets and pajama sets are made from viscose from bamboo, temperature regulating and moisture wicking, designed to sleep several degrees cooler than cotton, so your body can actually rest even when your hormones have other ideas. This isn't about fixing menopause, it's supporting your body through it with comfort that adapts to the season you're in. And Cozy Earth stands behind their products with a 100-night sleep trial and a 10-year warranty, because quality, comfort shouldn't come with an expiration date. Head to cozyearth.com and use code LOVELY for 20% off. And be sure to tell them I sent you in their survey. Because the woman who holds it all together deserves to be held in comfort too. Thanks, Cozy Earth.
And just one more thing, just to make this really clear, like you can be on HRT and still get a lot of benefits from S-equol. So I think that's really important to know.
Just about to ask you that. I was like, okay, so like, what about those of us that are already taking the hormones? So do we still want to take the S-equol supplement?
Yeah, I think you still want to take it. So for instance, I don't know about you, like I take oral HRT, So I still have like 7 days where I'm not taking it. And I can tell you those 7 days where I'm not taking it, I'm a mess. So it's nice to have a little bit of estrogen activity so that, I
Yes.
can sleep through the night, that kind of thing. And then the
Yes.
other thing is, as I mentioned before, the fact that something like S-equol has a lot of estrogen beta receptor activity
Mhm.
is really beneficial for us. So that estrogen beta activity can, for instance, help our skin. So as I said, we're kind of noticing our skin's falling apart. So there's a study with S-equol showing that women who took S-equol had less wrinkles like over 3 months time, and they had better skin hydration and better tone. And that's because the S-equol can help build up collagen in our skin that once again we're kind of losing as we don't
Mhm.
get as much estrogen activity. The other thing about S-equol that's really interesting is it also can bind to DHT, so dihydroxy testosterone. And women
Okay.
have this as a kind of, yeah, an androgen that once you lose estrogen, this androgen, this DHT can lead to things that we really don't like. It can like lead to more hair loss. So women, I think, notice that their hair gets thinner as they go through perimenopause. And the DHT can also kind of make your skin break out. And that's also really upsetting. Like I couldn't believe it when I started to have my skin break out in my 40s.
Hmm.
And that's because of DHT, or usually it could be because of DHT, like there's lots of different reasons, but this is something that's pretty common. And S-equol helps control that as well too, so that you're not going to get that extra activity that, yeah, once estrogen's gone, you're having more DHT kind of doing its thing in your body.
Hmm.
So yeah, so I would say
This.
it's for sure useful for HRT users
Okay.
or people who just don't want to go to the HRT level. They just want to start off somewhere a little bit more, I would say, gentle.
Okay. All right. So would this be something I would take with my MitoQ supplement as well?
You could definitely take it with MitoQ.
Yeah.
This is the whole point, is that we are really trying to look at, for instance, mitochondrial health is like that real basis of how can you age the best. And S-equol has been shown to have mitochondrial activity as well. So somewhat through the estrogen receptors, but it's also an antioxidant on its own. So it can synergize with MitoQ in terms of this antioxidant capability. And then I would say also just with mitoQ, like it's going to be a lot more potent mitochondrial antioxidant, but it's not going to hit any estrogen receptors. So I think this is where, for women to
Okay.
really hit that root cause of what's going wrong with them, it makes sense that they go for the S-equol to get that overall metabolic control.
Where can people that are listening to the show find out more about
More about
S-equol?
it.
Yes, and
Yeah.
where can we buy it? More importantly.
Yeah. So yeah, you can buy it on mitoq.com. That's my company's website. You can also go to Amazon and type in mitoq and S-equol, and you'll also find it there. So yeah, I think those are the easiest places for people in America. If you're not in America, probably just the website is the easiest. So
Okay.
yeah,
Right. And of course, I'm in Canada, but lots of my listeners are in the United States, lots of them in Canada too. So it's good to have options. And of course, you're in New Zealand, right?
I'm in New Zealand. Yeah.
Which is
And
great.
I will tell you, I find it very refreshing. New Zealand is so much more advanced in the approach for menopause. Like, I love it here. So they're
Say
really like all
more.
about prevention medicine.
Oh,
Just,
nice.
yeah, they're really aware that women are going to go through this change and they just need a lot of help. So when I went in to see my physician in New Zealand, I kind of had this like borderline hypertension as I was telling you about,
Mhm.
and it's almost a little bit borderline because I try to take out salt and I just can't help it. I have to go and get the greasy food.
Mhm.
And
It
this is
happens.
where, yeah, this is where my physician was like, even though you're taking HRT, and sometimes people worry about taking HRT and hypertensive, like you should just nip this in the bud. So you're not really hypertensive yet, but you're getting close to that. So I will just prescribe you something and you just take it for whatever you think your hypertension, is acting up. So they're really
Interesting.
all about prevention. They're not like waiting for you to get to the full-blown disease. They want to help you early on. And that's
Wow.
the message I really wish that more women in America and Canada got, that like don't wait for someone to come up to you and say like, yeah, you have full-blown, coronary artery disease, like try to get it early, like keep your arteries flexible, because that flexibility, for instance, of your arteries, that starts to go down in
Mhm.
your 40s, and there's a lot you can do in the meantime.
As it turns out. Same
Yeah.
things with your brain. And of course, the vascularity is a big part of what happens with brain aging. But we're all about prevention on this show. We're all about education. We're all
Yeah.
about advocacy because this is why I do what I do is to bring guests like you on the show to teach the women in my community how we can self-advocate because quite often our doctors are not helpful, our communities and families may not be helpful, but we can always educate ourselves. There's so much power there.
Completely. And this is where I think we have to, in a way, because as I said, like I think the healthcare situation in America, not so much in
Mhm.
Canada, it's just overloaded and you can't really expect the help from your doctors. They're not into prevention. So you have to advocate for yourself.
Yeah, that's just it's such a bizarre statement to say not doctors not into prevention, but you're unfortunately you are absolutely right. We must be educated enough to self-advocate and even better if you can advocate for other people in your family or your community. So, okay, tell us again, please, where can people go to find out more about you, about S-equol, about MitoQ? Please give us the information.
Yeah, so really like I would be aware of like that mitoq.com has like all the information, and especially if you want to hear all about the science, you can look at all the science in our science page, and we can list all these studies I just talked about because we're all about proof. We want people to know that we're scientifically validating everything that we do to make sure that we're offering the very best of, what's out there in terms of supplements. And so, yeah, that's like that's my reason to be in life is to make sure that
You
people
too.
are getting scientifically kind of advocated things that really make a difference, not just kind of like, oh, we saw one study that it worked. It's more like, no, we saw many studies that it worked.
Yeah,
So the other
I love
the
it.
other site that might be interesting for people to look at is we have a mitochondrial health research site called mcrp.dev, and that's where we talk about a lot of the research that is done with mitoQ, with mitoquinol. And that goes into a lot of areas of women's health, as I think I've mentioned last time. So that's another area that people can look at. And then just, the usual things like go to YouTube and type in mitoQ, and you can see a lot of talks I've given like all over the world on mitoQ and on women's health. It's just my passion. Yeah.
I love it. And we're privileged to have you here a second time in a year. So thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm just so grateful. Again, the excitement with which I take notes when you're talking, you're like my favorite professor, madly scrawling notes. So thank you for bringing that out in me.
Oh, I'm so glad. And I really had to try to keep myself from talking about the brain as much because I so much want to talk about the brain, but I think it's also important to just address all the other things. So glad we
Uh,
could have that talk. The body is a
yes.
very complex thing that it all interacts, but we have to pay attention to all of it.
It's so true. And yes, you and I can have the brain conversation again. Next time you're on the show, we'll have to talk about
Oh,
brain
for
health again.
sure. Yeah.
This is what happens when two brain nerds get together and we want to talk about all the brain things, especially when it comes to women's health. But metabolism, women's metabolic health at menopause. Oh my God. We're really like, talk about an explosion of information that we're understanding right now. And certainly, we're learning a lot about it from seeing how people respond to the GLP-1 medications, etc. That's another conversation for another day, but we're learning so much about metabolic health for both men and women from the medications. But it's good to know that there are so many all avenues for support. It's so helpful. So thank you again for coming on the
Yeah.
show. May I ask you the last question that I ask all my guests?
Sure, go for it.
Okay, let's see. It'd be interesting to see how this compares to what you said last time. Okay, knowing what you know now, what would you tell your younger self?
So lately, I can tell you the thing that I have not been able to control as much is stress. which is crazy because I've studied stress and its effects on the brain for decades, and I would have thought I would be able to control it as well. And I have not learned to control it as well. So I think what I would tell my younger self is like, you think that you're just living in this kind of like situation where you're dealing with stress well, but it is making a difference really early on. So I'm pretty sure all the stress I had as a younger person, like all that kind of cortisol flooding through me, most of my life has done some damage. So I wish I had looked at that earlier. And actually, I'll just leave you with this one really cool study I just read where this is the thing I did not realize. So women who like risks, who are risk taking, even though they don't realize this is happening, they're actually getting deleterious amounts of cortisol because of this risk taking activity. So I always thought that was a benefit of something that I thought was, a good part of my personality is like I like to try to be innovative. I like to take risks and see what happens. But it's really damaging in the end. So you just have to control that as much as you can.
Wow. Oh my God, dropping truth bombs through the research for us once again. I'll be thinking about that one
Okay.
for a
Yeah.
while.
Oh yeah. I could go on about it, but for another day. Yeah.
Yes, for another day. Dr. Siobhan Mitchell, thank you for joining us again today on the Not Your Mother's Menopause podcast.
Thank you. Anytime.
The information and other content provided in this show, or in any linked materials, is not intended and should not be construed as medical advice, nor is the information a substitute for professional medical expertise or treatment. We are doctors, but we aren't your doctor. Seek your doctor's opinion. If you or any other person has a medical concern, you should consult with your healthcare provider or seek other professional medical treatment. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something that you have heard in this podcast or in any linked materials. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or emergency services immediately. The opinions and views expressed on this page and in this show have no relation to those of any academic, hospital, health practice, or other institution. Thank you.